Good morning. This is Lee Matthew Jackson. We are live, and today I want to share with you how I landed my very first client. But we'll go further. Not only are we going to talk about landing my first client, but we're also going to talk about how I developed a niche in a really small town here in the UK. It's practically a village. It's only called a town because it has a town hall. It's an ongoing argument. We won't go into it, but it's politics. There's a lot of strong opinions in this town/village. You have to be very careful what you say. Anyway, so how did I discover my niche within a very small environment? I'll share a few of the mistakes I made in business very early on as a teenager, and also some of the lessons that I learned. So let's paint the scene. I live in a lovely town/village, to be determined, in Findon. It's in the UK. It's beautiful. It has a church. We're surrounded by small shops. Unfortunately, many over the years have shut down because of different circumstances, etc. But back then, we were surrounded by loads of shops. This is 1999, early 2000 time. We had boutique-style shops. We had many local pubs, etc. It was a great time. And I'd moved into the area, and I knew I wanted to be in business. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but my only reach was the internet with a 56k modem, which didn't really get me very far, and social media wasn't really a thing, and online marketing was something I had no idea about. So my only audience was Findon. And sure, I could have stretched beyond Findon and reached out into all of the other areas, but I didn't have a car, and again, I didn't really have any sort of online presence. So the only way I was able to get my first client and also to attract more clients was to reach out physically as a person, as a human, to the catchment area that I could reach on my legs. And the first client I was able to land proper as a web design client was a company called Alicia. I'm still friends with one of the founders many years later. And this was a lingerie company. So you can imagine me as a teenager, I was very pleased to be doing a lingerie website. They were actually over the road from us, and all I did was went in and visited. I'd noticed their website had problems that they had, and I just went in and I introduced myself as Lee. I live over the road. I'm a local web designer, and I was pretty honest that I was looking to build a web design business, and I'd also noticed they had some problems with their websites. And June and the team there were absolutely lovely and said, you know what, we are struggling. Here's what we would love to do with our website, but we don't know how. And that was my challenge then, to say, great, well, I'll charge you X. I could do this and this and this for you. And I actually continued to work for them for several years, in fact, and that was a really good experience for me. They were super patient as well, because I lived across the road, but I've got to admit, I was pretty damn unreliable at times. I wouldn't do what I said I was going to do on the days and the times I said I was going to do them. I would probably be 2 or 3 weeks late when I wanted to send them an invoice, etc. So, hey, I had a girlfriend. I was still a teenager. I was like totally besotted with this girl, and time with the girlfriend was way more exciting than working, I'm afraid. But they were super patient, and to this day, I am so grateful for the start that they gave me. They put trust in me, but I think what they appreciated was that I rocked up physically. I was honest. I had a conversation with them. I shared value with them, saying, I believe these are the things that are wrong with your website. They recognized that. They recognized the problem, and they saw me as a potential solution, and they took a punt. And I'm really grateful to this day that they did. Now, what happened over a period of time, however, was I realized that I couldn't survive off of one client, and I needed to continue to reach out. So I started to look at what was around me, and there seemed to be a predominant amount of antique shops. Findon back then was really well known for the antiques trade, and there were at least 10 antique shops, maybe, at least, possibly, maybe just under, maybe just over. There were a lot of antique shops. There was 3 antique shops just walking distance from my house, plus there were many more, including a massive antique centre just on the other side of the village near the pub, which had tons and tons and tons of barns brimming full. It was an old farm, brimming full of antiques. So I figured that I would at least go and try one of the antique shops, not thinking I was ever going to niche down into antiques necessarily. But I went to one of the antique shops and offered them a little bit of help, ended up helping them with a couple of eBay things, went to another antique shop, said I've been doing work with X and Y antique shop. And before long, I actually became the local web developer for antique shops in Finden. I mean, that's the niche within the niche within the niche, eh? And one of my best clients was a company called Finden Antiques, and I would go there every single week. I had a digital camera, and we would take pictures of the stock. We would put stuff on eBay. We would continue to keep their site going. We'd put stock on the website as well as putting stock on eBay as well to try and shift stuff because this was early adoption here. The client realized that yes, footfall was a good way of shifting stock, and they were lucky people from all over the world would come to Finden just to come and check out the antiques in these stores. But they also recognized that they couldn't just rely on that, and they invested, and I invested my time as well in continuing to look after their online presence. This is back in the noughties. Again, terribly slow internet. They again had no broadband. It was 56k modems. So we were taking pictures, putting stuff up on eBay, uploading it picture by picture. I think each picture was 1 megabyte, so you were having to wait an awfully long time for stuff to upload. But that's kind of how I developed my niche, and from that I had the confidence to reach out to other antique shops and continued to support those people. Some of the mistakes I made, though, were being very unreliable. I was a teenager. I was head over heels in love with my now wife, and if she just fluttered her eyelids, and said, "Hey, let's go for a walk," or whatever it was, I was far too happy to go ahead and do that and go and hang out with her rather than get certain bits of work done. So one of the biggest mistakes I made was being quite unreliable. I would get the work done. I would never let the clients down in that essence, but I would very often be late. And that started to damage the reputation that I had, and eventually led as well to, I think, to the first demise of my business, where eventually I thought, you know what, I'm not making enough money. I'm not really enjoying this necessarily. And I think I need to get a job. And eventually I did get a job. I always blame the software that came out, was it Front Page or something like that from Microsoft? Because my clients said, you know what, we don't need you anymore. We're just going to use this, or we're going to do it ourselves on eBay, etc. So, and I don't blame them because I was, teenager, 18, 19, quite unreliable. But that's exactly how I bagged my first client. I walked in, had an open and honest conversation, led with some value, and they took a punt. How I developed the niche, again, was by accident, but I recognized with even the very small audience that I had, which was a tiny village, there was something that was common amongst a lot of the shops there, and I was able to serve a very particular need, which was helping them shift stock online. So I became the web master, web developer, web designer for antique companies in a very small village. I couldn't do that now. There's probably 2 antique shops left, unfortunately. Things have changed over the last 20 years. But if you ever feel like you have a small audience, if you ever feel like where you live is in the middle of nowhere, then be encouraged, because you can still carve out a business. You still can carve out a niche. You can still rock up to local businesses, add value, and support them. And they are such valuable lessons. Things have changed nowadays. I have a large online audience, especially through the podcast, where we get thousands of downloads every month from people all around the world. We get encouraging messages in. Graham, for example, last night sent me a beautiful message about how the podcast has helped change his life and his business, and I was crying my eyes out with how wonderful that is. That's 20 years later, and I do have a wonderfully large audience, but despite that, that wasn't always the case. And yet I was still able to do business. So when people look at the likes of, say, James Rose, who runs Agency Highway, or WP Builds with Nathan and David, and all these large podcasts, and think, well, it's all right for you guys. You've got huge audiences. Be encouraged that you don't need to have a huge audience. You don't need to live in a massive city. You don't need all of that to be able to run a business, to be able to show up and to add value and to help people. So be encouraged. Thank you so much for letting me share my little story with you back in the days when I had a full head of hair. I actually had a full head of hair. I had amazing hairline. I kind of missed that. I started losing it kind of 18, and I was in denial for quite a few years. Sad times. We will mourn the loss of my hair, but folks, remember, wherever you are, you can build an audience. You can carve a niche. You do have value, and if you are struggling to generate leads, show up wherever you can and start to add some value. Thank you, folks. Have a wonderful day.